in the underground fighting pits of Ashfall, where the desperate and the damned fought for survival and the entertainment of those who could afford to watch, there lived a marked one who had been broken in every way except the one that mattered. A symbol that should have meant honor and power, but which in his case meant only pain and exploitation. He had been a sun warrior once, proud and free, serving the kingdom with distinction until the day he was falsely accused of treason, stripped of his position, and sold into slavery to settle fabricated debts. Beaten and starved and brutalized until he was hollow shell of what he had been. His captors tried everything to break his mark, to destroy the Solar Lion's connection, so he would be truly theirs, rather than belonging even symbolically to the divine. They used dark magic and blessed chains, torture, and deprivation. When the guards ordered her to leave him bleeding and broken as punishment for refusing to kill his opponent, she stayed. She knelt beside him, placed her hands on his mark, and whispered words of healing and recognition. And in that moment when someone finally chose to stay rather than abandon him, when compassion touched him for the first time in 3 years, his mark exploded with light so intense it destroyed the chains binding him, so hot it burned the guards who tried to stop her, so powerful it brought the entire fighting pit complex crashing down around them. This is their story. The city of Ashfall existed in the shadows, built in the ruins of an ancient settlement that had been destroyed centuries ago by volcanic eruption and never properly rebuilt. It was a place where laws were suggestions rather than mandates, where power belonged to whoever could take and hold it, where human life was cheap commodity to be bought and sold and used up. The fighting pits were Ashfall's primary entertainment and economic engine, gladiatorial combat on scale that would have been illegal in civilized territories, but which thrived here where civilization's rules did not reach. Wealthy patrons came from across the territories to watch marked ones and exceptional unmarked fighters battle for survival, wagering enormous sums on outcomes, treating human suffering as spectacle to be consumed and enjoyed. The fighters were slaves, most of them acquired through various means, legal and illegal, kept in brutal conditions, and some, like Kael, had been warriors brought low by false accusations and corrupted justice systems that valued profit over truth. Member of an elite order serving the Solar Lion and protecting marked individuals throughout the kingdoms. He had been good at his work, dedicated and skilled, rising to position of squad commander by age 30. Acknowledged by the totem itself as worthy of divine connection and power. Then everything had fallen apart. His squad had been assigned to protect a noble family during journey through contested territories, routine escort mission that should have been straightforward. Kael's squad had fought fiercely, driving off the attackers, but not before 2 of the family members were killed. Investigation had followed, and somehow evidence had surfaced suggesting Kael had leaked information to the bandits, that he had been bribed to allow the attack, that he was responsible for the deaths. The evidence had been fabricated, Kael knew, planted by someone with resources and motivation to destroy him, but he had never been able to prove it or identify who had framed him. He had chosen survival, hoping to eventually prove his innocence and reclaim his life. That had been 3 years ago, and hope had died slowly under the weight of constant brutality and exploitation. Vex had recognized Kael's mark immediately, had seen opportunity to profit from marked fighter who could draw premium crowds. But he had also seen danger in allowing Kael to retain connection to divine power that might enable escape or rebellion. So Vyse had worked systematically to break that connection, to weaken the mark until Kael was marked in name only, possessing just enough power to make fights interesting, but not enough to threaten the control his captors maintained. He used chains blessed by dark practitioners who specialized in suppressing divine marks, had Kael beaten regularly to maintain state of weakness that limited his ability to channel power, matches designed to damage without quite killing, because dead fighters generated no profit. And between fights, Vex tried various methods to actually break the mark itself, to sever the connection between Kael and the Solar Lion completely. The mark grew dim and weak, barely visible as faint outline on Kael's scarred back, but it refused to be extinguished entirely. Kael fought because he had to killed when commanded, though it sickened him, survived because the alternative was worse. But inside he was dying, losing pieces of himself with every brutal match, every beating, every day of captivity. His memories of being free warrior seemed like dreams from someone else's life too distant and disconnected to feel real. His hope of proving innocence and reclaiming his life had faded into background noise he barely noticed anymore. He was becoming what his captors wanted, broken tool that performed as required without retaining enough will or humanity to resist effectively. Then Sera arrived at the pits, and everything changed. She was healer, not fighter. She was perhaps 28 years old, unmarked but skilled in traditional healing arts, with gentle hands and compassionate eyes that seemed out of place in the brutal environment of the pits. She came from one of the healing orders that trained practitioners throughout the territories, had served in various hospitals and clinics, building reputation for skill and dedication. But she had made powerful enemy, and when Sera had intervened to correct dangerous mistakes, she had been accused of overstepping her position and undermining established authority. The accusations had been backed by the noble family, and suddenly Sera had found herself blacklisted from legitimate healing work, unable to find employment anywhere respectable. Desperate and running out of resources, she had accepted Vex's offer to work in the pits, healing arts she had dedicated her life to mastering. Her first week in the pits was horrifying education in the depths of human cruelty and capacity for suffering. She treated fighters who had been brutalized beyond what any person should endure, saw injuries that should have been fatal, witnessed the systematic dehumanization that turned people into commodities valued only for entertainment potential. She wanted to refuse, to walk away, to report what was happening to authorities who might intervene. But she knew authorities either did not care or were already being paid to ignore the pits, that walking away meant these fighters would have even less support than her limited ability to help provided, that her horror and moral outrage changed nothing except making her feel helpless and complicit. But because she treated fighters differently than anyone else in the pits did, where guards and overseers and even previous healers had viewed fighters as objects or animals, Sera saw people. She spoke to them respectfully, explained what she was doing when treating injuries, but she could provide moments of human connection and dignity to people who received neither from anyone else. Kael watched her work, initially suspicious because kindness in the pits usually meant manipulation or a hidden agenda, but gradually recognizing that her compassion was genuine, even if it seemed foolishly naive given where she was. fighting with desperation of someone who knew losing meant punishment or death. The match was scheduled for fight to death, no surrender allowed, crowd baying for blood and spectacular finish. Kael won eventually, his solar lion mark flaring just enough to give him edge despite its diminished state. He had killed when forced before, but something in him refused this time. Some last shred of warrior honor, asserting that he would not murder for entertainment, no matter what punishment awaited. The guards dragged him from arena floor, his opponent's life spared by his defiance, and Vex's rage was incandescent. Vex screamed, striking Kael across the face hard enough to split his cheek open. You are property, tool, you do exactly what you are told, or you suffer consequences until you learn obedience. The beating that followed was systematic and brutal, designed to cause maximum pain without creating damage that would prevent him from fighting in few days once he healed enough. They used weighted clubs on his back, targeting the solar lion mark specifically, enough to keep him alive but not enough to ease his suffering. This was punishment and lesson combined demonstration to other fighters about consequences of defiance. Seeing multiple injuries that required immediate treatment if he was to survive. The guards stood watching, one of them voicing their orders clearly. Minimal care only. He defied Master Vex, refused to kill as commanded. He suffers until he learns, and you follow orders or join him in punishment. Sera looked at the guards, then at Kael's battered body, then back at the guards. She made her choice with full awareness of consequences, but also with absolute conviction that it was right choice, regardless of personal cost. No, she said simply, I will not leave him like this. He will die without proper treatment, and I became healer to save lives, not to abandon people because someone powerful wants them to suffer. I will treat him fully, and if that brings punishment on me, then so be it. Better to face consequences of doing right thing than live with knowledge I let someone die when I could have helped. The guards moved to enforce their orders, to drag her away from Kael and bring her to Vex for punishment. But as they reached for her, as she placed her hands on Kael's solar lion mark in preparation to channel healing energy, something remarkable happened. The mark, which had been dim and weak, barely visible under blood and damage, suddenly blazed to life. Not the struggling glow it had shown during the fight, but eruption of pure golden light and heat that filled the entire medical area, that made everyone present cry out and shield their eyes. The divine connection that Vex had spent 3 years trying to break, that had been battered and suppressed and nearly severed, suddenly roared back to full strength and beyond, amplified by recognition that someone had chosen him, had valued him enough to risk themselves for his well-being. Heat radiated from him in waves, burning the guards who tried to approach, forcing everyone except Sera to retreat. And Kael felt his injuries healing impossibly fast, broken bones realigning, torn flesh knitting closed. When the light faded enough to see clearly, when the heat diminished to merely intense rather than unbearable, Kael was standing, fully healed, his mark blazing on his back, brighter than it had been even before his capture. You stayed, he said, voice rough with emotion he had not allowed himself to feel in 3 years. They ordered you to leave me suffering, and you stayed. Why? Because leaving you was wrong, Sera said simply. I could not walk away from you any more than I could walk away from anyone's suffering when I have ability to help. Her words, her presence, her simple act of staying when everyone else would have left, cracked something deep in Kael's chest, broke through the armor of numbness and resignation he had built over 3 years of captivity. He felt tears on his face, the first he had shed since his capture, and he felt anger, clean, burning rage at everything that had been done to him, everything he had been forced to become. The guards were shouting, calling for reinforcements, but Kael was not finished. 3 years of suppressed power, 3 years of divine connection, barely maintained against constant assault, now flooded through him at full strength, and he was done being property, done being broken. His solar lion mark blazed brighter, and he raised his hands, channeling power in ways he had been unable to do for 3 years. Golden flames erupted from his palms, not the destroying fire of combat, but something more fundamental. Solar power that burned away darkness and corruption, and everything built on cruelty and exploitation. Bring it down, he commanded the solar lion through their restored connection. Burn away this place of suffering. Let it be ash and memory rather than ongoing torment. The power responded, flames spreading through the complex with impossible speed, consuming wood and rope and canvas, weakening stone foundations, bringing the entire structure down in controlled collapse that allowed people to escape, but which left nothing standing except rubble and ash. Guards and fighters and support staff fled in panic as the building came down, and in the chaos, Sera pulled Kael toward exit, guiding him despite his greater strength and her own fear, refusing to leave him even as the world burned around them. Kael's mark was blazing so brightly, it was like carrying piece of the sun, and everywhere the light touched, divine power followed, burning away dark magic and blessed chains that had bound not just him but other marked ones throughout the city who had been enslaved or exploited, creating cascade effect that freed dozens of marked individuals who had been kept in various forms of captivity throughout Ashfall. The city's criminal power structure, built on exploitation and slavery and systematic abuse of those who should have been honored for their divine connections, began collapsing as its foundations literally burned away. Vex appeared in the chaos, surrounded by guards, his face twisted with rage as he watched profits and power dissolving in golden flames. "You have destroyed everything," he screamed at Kael. "Do you know how much I invested in you? How much effort I spent breaking you?" His voice carrying absolute conviction and power that made even Vex step back involuntarily. "My mark responded by burning away everything you built on suffering and exploitation. You wanted to break me, but instead she freed me by being what you never could, human being capable of genuine compassion." Vex ordered his guards to attack, to capture, or kill Kael and Sera both. The guards, seeing marked warriors ready to fight for real freedom rather than as entertainment, chose survival over loyalty to Vex and fled. The criminal lord found himself abandoned, his power broken as thoroughly as he had tried to break Kael's mark. In the weeks that followed the destruction of the fighting pits, as Ashfall transformed from criminal haven into something approaching legitimate civilization, Kael and Sera remained together, becoming foundation for something deeper and more enduring than either had experienced before. The immediate aftermath was chaotic and overwhelming. Vacuum created by the pit's destruction threatened to plunge the city into violence as various factions fought to fill the void. But Kael found himself in position of unexpected authority, respected by the freed marked ones who viewed him as the catalyst for their liberation, feared by remaining criminal elements who had witnessed his power destroy an empire built on exploitation and suffering. The freed marked ones looked to him for guidance, for direction about what to build in place of systems that had enslaved them, and he could not refuse their need even when he barely understood his own, providing stability and practical wisdom that complemented his restored power and combat skills. While Kael dealt with security issues and negotiations with neighboring territories about Ashfall's new status, Sera established a healing clinic that offered free treatment to anyone who needed it, creating foundation of social infrastructure the city desperately required. Together they became symbols of what Ashfall could become, a place where power served justice rather than exploitation, where marked ones used their gift to protect and heal rather than to dominate and destroy. But beneath the public roles and responsibilities they had assumed, both Kael and Sera carried wounds that required time and care and patience to heal properly. Kael's recovery from 3 years of captivity and systematic brutalization was neither quick nor linear. He suffered nightmares almost nightly, waking in panic, convinced he was back in the pits, that his freedom was a dream that would dissolve into familiar nightmare of chains and beatings and forced combat, finding it difficult to accept that people might care about his well-being without expecting something in return. He dealt with rage that had been suppressed for 3 years, anger at everyone who had abused him and failed to help him, fury at systems that had allowed his suffering to continue unchallenged, required processing and channeling into productive directions rather than allowing it to consume him or turn him into a bitter, violent person defined entirely by past trauma. And he wrestled constantly with shame and self-loathing about things he had been forced to do during captivity, people he had hurt or killed at his captor's commands. Survival was not weakness, and obedience under threat was not true consent. Sera witnessed all of this, supported him through the difficult moments, provided presence and stability without trying to fix him or rush his healing process. She understood from her own training and experience that trauma recovery required time and patience, that pushing for faster progress often created setbacks rather than acceleration. Kael to move through his process at whatever pace his psyche could manage. She held him when nightmares woke him screaming, reminded him gently that he was safe and free when panic attacks made him forget reality. She listened without judgment when he needed to talk through his anger and shame, validated his feelings while also gently challenging thoughts that were demonstrably irrational or self-destructive. She gave him space when he needed solitude to process difficult emotions, that she was always available when he needed support. And crucially, she took care of her own well-being and recovery alongside supporting his, recognizing that she also carried trauma from her time in the pits, even though her experience had been vastly different from his. She had witnessed horrors that haunted her, had felt helpless and complicit in suffering she could not prevent. She needed to process those experiences and their impact on her sense of self and professional identity, needed to forgive herself for things she could not have changed or prevented, seeking space to simply be together without constant demands and crises requiring their attention. They found a small village where no one knew them or their history, rented simple cottage overlooking the ocean, and spent days doing nothing except existing in each other's presence, without pressure or expectation. They walked along beaches, swam in water that was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating for Kael, who had never learned to swim properly. talked for hours about everything and nothing. Kael spoke words he had been building toward for weeks. I need to tell you something I have not said to anyone, something I have barely admitted to myself. When I was in the pits, when I was being broken day after day, I reached a point where I wanted to die. I was too much of a coward to kill myself directly, but I stopped trying as hard to win fights, stopped defending myself as effectively, hoping opponent would do what I could not do for myself. That last fight, the one where you intervened, I had decided that was it. Then you stayed when you should have left, and suddenly I wanted to live again. Your compassion, your choice to risk yourself for me, reminded me that life could include kindness rather than just cruelty, that I was worth something to someone even in my broken state. You saved my life not just by healing my injuries, but by giving me reason to want to survive. I need you to know that, to understand that your choice to stay meant more than you probably realized. Sera was crying by the time he finished, tears streaming down her face as she processed what he had revealed. I suspected, she said quietly, but I did not know for certain. I saw in your eyes that you had given up, that you were not really fighting anymore. That is partly why I stayed, why I could not leave you even when guards threatened me. That moment would be sentencing you to death more surely than the beating they had already inflicted. I am glad I stayed. I am glad my choice mattered that much, that I gave you reason to want to live. But Kael, you need to know that what you described, that desire to escape suffering through death, that is not cowardice. That is human response to unbearable circumstances, the mind trying to find solution to pain that feels endless. You have nothing to be ashamed of in how you survived or what you felt during that impossible time. Kael pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, breathing in her scent that had become home and safety and everything good in his new life. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for staying, for seeing me when I was invisible to myself, for giving me reason to rebuild rather than simply survive. I want to spend my life with you, building something that honors what we survived and ensures others do not have to endure what we endured. Will you let me do that? Will you let me be partner in healing the world, in using our experiences and skills to create something better than what we escaped? She answered by kissing him deeply, pouring everything she felt into physical expression that transcended words, overwhelmed by emotion and relief and joy at having found each other in midst of suffering, and somehow managed to build something beautiful from that. Traumatic foundation. 6 months after the destruction of the fighting pits, after the worst of individual trauma had been processed enough to function effectively, ashfall from criminal haven into legitimate city that could offer better life for its residents. The task was enormous and complex, requiring cooperation from multiple factions with competing interests, resources they barely possessed, and sustained commitment over years rather than weeks or months. That focusing on preventing others' suffering while building more just systems provided meaning and direction that aided recovery from their own traumatic experiences. They began by formally establishing what they called the Council of the Freed. That decisions affecting the city considered perspectives of those who had experienced exploitation and suffering under previous systems. Kael chaired the council initially, though he worked to distribute leadership responsibilities and eventually stepped back once stable structures were established. The Council's first major initiative was establishing comprehensive laws against slavery and exploitation, not just formal legal prohibitions that could be ignored, but enforcement mechanisms with real teeth. They created systems for investigating accusations of abuse or exploitation, procedures that actually protected victims rather than punishing them for coming forward, remedies that focused on restoration and prevention rather than simple punishment of perpetrators. The work was difficult and frequently frustrating, facing opposition from remaining criminal elements, and even from some legitimate merchants, who worried regulations would harm their businesses or limit their freedom to operate as they saw fit. Sera focused on establishing comprehensive healing infrastructure. Ashfall's residents needed support for psychological and emotional. She expanded her initial clinic into a network of healing houses throughout the city. Staffed by practitioners she recruited from various healing orders and traditions. She established specific programs for people recovering from trauma, drawing on her own experiences and her understanding of what had helped Kael's recovery process. She trained practitioners in techniques for treating not just symptoms but underlying causes of suffering, and she worked to reduce stigma around seeking help for psychological and emotional difficulties, normalizing mental health support the same way physical healing was already normalized. The healing houses became centers not just of medical treatment, but of community. 10 years after the destruction of the fighting pits, after a decade of sustained effort transforming Ashfall from criminal haven into thriving legitimate city, Kael and Sera stood together on a platform overlooking the central square where the pits had once stood. The square was now a memorial garden. Ordinary citizens who had built new lives and transformed Ashfall. Kael spoke first, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd, his solar lion mark visible and bright on his back. 10 years ago I was broken man fighting for others' entertainment, my divine mark nearly destroyed by systematic attempts to sever my connection to the solar lion. Then a healer named Sera chose to stay when she should have left, chose compassion when cruelty would have been safer, chose to see person worth saving when everyone else saw only disposable property. That compassion is catalyst for transformation more powerful than any weapon or system of control. We stand now in garden built where pits once operated, in city transformed from place of suffering into place of hope and opportunity. This transformation required years of sustained effort from thousands of people, but it began with simple choice to stay, to refuse to abandon someone's suffering when everyone else would have left. That is a lesson I hope we all carry forward, that our choices to stay with people who need us, to offer compassion when cruelty is easier, to refuse to participate in systems built on exploitation and suffering, those choices matter and ripple outward in ways we cannot always predict or measure. When I first came to the pits, I was running from my own failures and injustices, accepting terrible work because I had no better options, feeling complicit in suffering I could not prevent. I chose to stay because it was right choice regardless of consequences, because I had made vow to heal, and that meant healing even when dangerous, because I looked at broken warrior and saw person deserving compassion rather than object deserving punishment. But that is truth about compassion and choosing to stay. We do not always know the full consequences of our choices, cannot always predict how our actions will ripple outward. We simply have to trust that doing right thing matters, that refusing to participate in cruelty creates space for something better to emerge. Over past decade, I have witnessed countless people make similar choices, staying with those who suffered, offering compassion when abandonment would be easier, refusing to accept that suffering is inevitable or acceptable. This is what I hope we remember and carry forward, that transformation begins with individual choices to stay, to care, to refuse to accept unnecessary suffering. The ceremony concluded with lighting of memorial flame, eternal light honoring those who died in pits, while symbolizing hope and transformation that had followed their destruction. And the crowd's response was reverent silence followed by thunderous applause, staying over abandoning transformation over acceptance of status quo. The fund was controversial, criticized by some as encouraging dependency or rewarding people for being victims. But Kael and Sera persisted, recognizing from personal experience that escaping exploitation required more than just breaking physical chains, that people needed material support and skill development to build sustainable new lives. That evening, after the public ceremonies concluded and crowds dispersed, Kael and Sera returned to their home on Ashfall's northern edge, the same house they had moved into a decade ago when first establishing their life together. The house had been expanded over the years as their family grew. They had 2 children now, a daughter of 8 and a son of 5, both showing early signs of marks, though neither had been fully selected by totems yet. The children were with Sera's parents for the evening, giving Kael and Sera rare private time to reflect on the anniversary and everything it represented. They sat together in the garden they had planted and nurtured over 10 years, watching stars emerge as darkness fell, holding hands in comfortable silence that spoke of deep connection and shared understanding. "Do you ever regret it?" Kael asked eventually, breaking the silence. "Staying that night in the pits, triggering everything that followed? You could have walked away, kept your head down, eventually found safer work elsewhere. Instead, you risked yourself for broken slave you did not know, and that choice bound you to me, to Ashfall, to decade of difficult transformation work. Do you wish you had made different choice?" Sera considered the question seriously, giving it the weight it deserved, rather than offering automatic reassurance. "There have been moments when I regretted the complications and difficulties that followed," she admitted. "Times when transformation work felt overwhelming, when opposition seemed insurmountable, when I wondered if we were making any real difference or just rearranging suffering into slightly different configurations. But no, I do not regret the fundamental choice to stay. That was right decision then and remains right decision in retrospect. You were a person suffering who needed help, and I had ability to provide that help. Everything else followed from that basic ethical obligation. And look what we built from that moment of choice, Kael. Look at this city, these people who have genuine opportunities rather than just exploitation and suffering. Look at our family, our children who will grow up in a world where compassion matters and marks are honored rather than exploited. All of that exists because I stayed, because your mark responded, because thousands of people chose to build something better. I would make the same choice again without hesitation." Kael pulled her close, overwhelmed with love and gratitude that had not diminished despite decade of daily life together. "I was dying inside when you found me," he said quietly. "Not just from that specific beating, though that was severe enough to kill me without intervention, but dying spiritually, losing everything that made me human, rather than just tool for others' entertainment. I had given up, was planning to let myself be killed rather than continue existing in that hell. You gave me reason to want to live again, reminded me that compassion existed even in darkest places, showed me I was worth something beyond my utility as fighter and entertainment. You saved my life in every way that matters. Sera, every day since has been gift I never expected to receive, opportunity to be more than broken slave waiting to die. They sat together as darkness deepened and stars multiplied overhead, two people who had found each other in midst of suffering, and somehow managed to build something beautiful and meaningful from that traumatic foundation. Two people who proved that staying when everyone else leaves can trigger transformations that extend far beyond the immediate moment. That compassion is catalyst for change more powerful than any weapon or system of control. That marks cannot be truly broken when people refuse to abandon those who carry them. The solar lion's symbol glowed softly on Kael's back, steady reminder of divine connection that had been nearly destroyed, but which had roared back to full strength when someone chose to stay, when someone demonstrated that compassion mattered more than safety or obedience to cruel systems. And in that glow, in that quiet moment of reflection and gratitude, both of them understood that their story was not just about personal survival or romantic love, but about fundamental truth that needed remembering and repeating, that our choice is to stay with people who suffer, to offer compassion when cruelty is easier, to refuse to abandon those who need us, even when abandoning them would be safer. Those choices matter and ripple outward in ways we cannot always predict, creating possibilities for transformation that did not exist before we chose to stay. Reading pathway from exploitation to genuine independence rather than expecting people to somehow bootstrap themselves out of desperate situations with no help or resources. The fund was controversial, criticized by some as encouraging dependency or rewarding people for being victims. But Kael and Sera persisted, recognizing from personal experience that escaping exploitation required more than just breaking physical chains, that people needed material support and skill development to build sustainable new lives. Over time, as freed individuals became productive citizens, contributing to Ashfall's economy and community rather than remaining trapped in cycles of poverty and vulnerability to exploitation, even critics began acknowledging the fund's value and effectiveness. As Ashfall transformed, as new systems and structures took root and began functioning reliably, Kael and Sera found themselves able to focus more attention on their relationship and personal lives rather than constant crisis management and institution building. They moved from separate temporary housing into shared house on Ashfall's northern edge, modest but comfortable space that was entirely theirs rather than borrowed or provided by others. They established routines and rituals that created sense of normalcy and stability, morning coffee together before diving into their respective responsibilities, evening walks along Ashfall's refurbished waterfront where they could decompress and reconnect, weekly rest days where they deliberately avoided all work and focused entirely on being together without agenda or obligation. They learned each other's preferences and quirks, discovered how to support and challenge each other effectively, developed intimacy that went beyond their initial trauma-bonded connection into genuine deep partnership built on mutual knowledge and respect. Kael proposed marriage almost exactly 1 year after Sera had stayed with him in the pits, kneeling before her in the small garden they had planted together behind their house, offering ring he had commissioned from local artisan that incorporated both his solar lion symbol and healing symbols representing her work and dedication. The proposal itself was simple and heartfelt, focused on what they meant to each other and what they wanted to build together rather than grand gestures or elaborate romantic staging. "You stayed when everyone else would have left," he said, taking her hands in his solar lion mark glowing softly on his back, where it was now always visible, no longer something he hid or felt ashamed of, but symbol of divine connection he had reclaimed and honored. "You risked yourself for someone who was just broken slave to you, who had no right to expect compassion or help from anyone. You saw a person worth saving when I had forgotten I was person at all. When I was so broken, I wanted to die rather than continue suffering. You triggered the solar lion's response by showing me I was still worth something. That divine connection recognized true compassion, even when nothing else in my life did. You have stood beside me through the difficult work of recovering from trauma and rebuilding myself into someone I can respect. You have partnered with me in transforming this city from place of suffering into place of hope and opportunity. I love you, Sera. I love you for staying, for healing more than just my injuries, for being foundation that allowed me to rebuild myself and then helping me build something larger that serves others. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that your choice to stay was worthwhile, that the man you saved was worth the risk you took, that we can build something beautiful and meaningful together?" Sera pulled him up from his kneeling position and kissed him with passion and tenderness combined, tears streaming down her face, joy and love overflowing in ways that made words inadequate. "Yes," she said when they finally separated enough to speak. "Yes to you, to us, to building life together based on compassion and commitment to preventing suffering we both experienced. Yes, because I love you too, because staying with you was easy choice even when it was dangerous one, because you are absolutely worth every risk I took and more. Yes, because you have shown me that trauma does not have to define us, that we can grow beyond what was done to us, that choosing compassion and connection in wake of suffering is its own form of power. Yes, always yes, for as long as we have together." Their wedding 3 months later was community celebration attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been changed by the destruction of the fighting pits and the subsequent transformation of Ashfall. Freed marked ones stood alongside former guards who had defected and joined reform efforts. Healers who worked in Sera's network stood with merchants who supported council initiatives, creating diverse gathering that represented the new Ashfall rather than old criminal system. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply meaningful, combining traditional elements with innovations reflecting their specific experiences and values. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises about supporting each other's growth and recovery, about using their partnership to serve broader community while also prioritizing their personal connection, about choosing compassion consistently even when anger or hardness would be easier. When they sealed their marriage with kiss, when Kael's solar lion mark blazed bright enough to illuminate the entire ceremonial space, everyone present understood they were witnessing not just wedding, but affirmation of principles that had transformed a city. That compassion matters, that staying with someone when abandoning them would be easier is its own form of heroism. that marks cannot be truly broken when people refuse to be broken themselves, that love built on foundation of choosing each other daily is stronger than any chain or prison or systematic attempt at destruction. The celebration continued for 2 days, the entire city joining in festivities that marked both personal union and collective commitment to maintaining and extending the transformation that had begun when Sera chose to stay and Kael's mark responded by burning away empire built on suffering. If this story touched you, if you recognized the power of choosing to stay when everyone else leaves, of showing compassion when cruelty is easier, share your thoughts below. Subscribe to Solaris Legends for more tales of marks that cannot be broken, of compassion that triggers divine response, of staying when others abandon. Until next time, may you have courage to stay when staying is hard. May you find those who stay with you when you need them most. May you remember that sometimes the most powerful act is simply refusing to leave someone suffering alone.